All right. Hey guys. So I'm gonna try a new thing moving forward where I actually hop on a video to explain my thinking behind the pieces that I write on Substack. I'm just gonna put it out there. I don't care about the views and whatnot and the reactions. I just need a creative outlet at this point. So yeah, let's start. This week I talked about how shareholder primacy and the very concept of it is actually a huge driver of why investors flock to the US, and it's a huge part of the virtuous cycle that the US is going on right now. And um, just solely based on this, I don't see America collapsing at any time. I do see like other geopolitical issues at play and whatnot, obviously. There are very real, tangible threats to America's hegemony, but I don't see capital markets shying away from the US anytime soon. For those of you who don't know, shareholder primacy is the very concept that you put your shareholders' interests as a corporation above and beyond everything else that you have in your mind. So, what does that actually entail? What that actually entails is obviously you have a duty to meet your financial obligations, be that your expenses and your debt obligations. But right below those are liabilities that you actually have to pay out legally. But beyond that, on in terms of discretionary measures, your shareholder interests come first. So that means if you have retained earnings, if you made extra money this year, instead of using that to increase employee salaries, for example, you actually technically need to consider whether or not it's beneficial to put that towards share buyback programs or dividends for shareholders in order to help them meet their financial targets. So that's the basic concept. And this concept actually was affirmed by the Supreme Court. Obviously, there are scholarly disputes as to whether or not this actually still holds true in today's society. There actually hasn't been a Supreme Court ruling that actually calls up this case, but a lot of people attribute America's shareholder primacy uh, fanaticism to Dodge versus Ford from way back when. Essentially, Ford had a crap ton of retained earnings at one point and wanted to increase employee salaries to the point where its competitors could no longer sustainably guarantee employment to its workforce or hire, for that matter. Um, so Dodge took Ford to the Supreme Court essentially, and tried to argue that Ford was breaking the law and setting a bad precedent for companies by not putting shareholder interests first. Surprisingly, it worked, and that ever since then, shareholder primacy became a very much an ethos of the American corporation. Now, I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad either. It has its benefits, pros and cons, obviously. Uh, but one of the things that I realized currently living in Korea is that this concept of shareholder primacy in this doesn't exist in a lot of societies outside of America, and like as a result, there are very real repercussions to the financial markets and to capitalist systems. So, for example, one of the examples that I brought up was LG Energy Solutions, which used to be just a business unit in LG Chemical, which is a subsidiary of LG. I know it's complicated. That's just how most conglomerates in Korea are organized. By like they just have a shit ton of business operations that are basically not related to each other, and yeah, it's a hodgepodge. I'll get to it eventually, one day. But essentially, the concept of shareholder privacy does not exist in Korea, be it from legal precedent or the word of the law. And as a result, a lot of these conglomerates act quite actively, against the interests of their shareholders. Uh, LG Chemical's division spun out into its own corporation as a subsidiary in what we now call LG Energy Solutions. It's valued at got well over $50 billion, and it's actually the crowning jewel in LG's business portfolio at this point. But by spinning it out, uh, essentially, LG Energy Solutions is no longer obliged to report to the shareholders of LG Chemical. What's more, this all happened during the battery craze of like the COVID era when electric cars were all a buzz. Uh, so this stock had rally, whereas LG Chemical stock stagnated. So a lot of these shareholders also missed out on the price appreciation of their underlying assets. Uh, Simply said, like they missed out. They missed out on the rally, and this all was this all was permitted under the South Korean legal structure, which is bewildering to me as somebody who studied in New York and learned the basics of finance in the heart of Wall Street, essentially. Mind you, I didn't practice it. I have friends that have practiced, and they have reaffirmed this to me. Now, that being said, is shareholder primacy always fun and games? Is it always lovey-dovey? Absolutely not. There are there are very real um, side effects to shareholder primacy. So, for example, like I mentioned, the whole concept, the whole reason this is very much embedded within the American corporate ethos, excuse me, is because of Dodge versus Ford, and the primary argument in that case was that Ford was not putting shareholder interests first and trying to raise wages for its workers. Under this mantra of shareholder primacy, you absolutely cannot raise uh, employee wages. Uh, Heck, it's very difficult to justify raising someone's wage to outpace inflation by a significant amount without external factors to so for example during the COVID era the excuse was, look, it's very difficult to hire employees. Talented employees are in a shortage right now, so we have to pay them more. So that's when American employers were able to raise wages outpacing inflation, for better or for worse. A lot of the times it barely keeps pace with inflation. Heck, it doesn't keep pace with like lifestyle inflation. Was it certain inflation metrics such as housing inflation and whatnot? A lot of people can't make rent today because wages haven't kept up with rent. A lot of people can't pay for their kids' college education because wages haven't kept up with college education, etc., etc. It's very difficult to try to bundle that and try to compensate workers for that in a system where shareholder primacy is very much the law. On the other hand, though, if you go a step too far, where like Europe and Canada are moving towards stakeholder capitalism, where you're trying to take into consideration more stakeholders, ESG initiatives, DEI initiatives, and whatnot, investors quickly realize that their interests aren't being fought for, and they're actually getting, well, in their mind what they're thinking is, look, you're going to pay out all these expenses first, you're going to compensate all these people who haven't actually taken an active risk in building the business, and we're going to be left with the scraps. So there is a trade-off that you're going to have to make. What I would argue, and in the piece I don't think I actually did a good job of this, is if this is the middle, if this is where America is, and Korea is behind the US and is trying to play catch up, a lot of developing nations are trying to play catch up to the United States in terms of financial markets. These countries don't have shareholder primacy in mind. They have very weak shareholder protections. It's all about the ruling family, the founding family, making sure that they keep their little kingdoms and aristocracies alive. these guys are now trying to play catch up and instill this value of shareholder primacy. I think that's progress. Whereas a lot of more progressive nations such as Canada and the EU and Australia, they're trying to move on from shareholder primacy and trying to, pay it back to the community to essentially create a more virtuous cycle. We're quickly realizing, especially in Canada where I'm from, there is very much an active capital outflow from capital markets. The investment into businesses just isn't there because investors are quickly realizing investing into businesses in these sorts of systems is a fool's errand. So they're flocking to places where investor protection is very much the rule, and taking into consideration anything else that actually can be challenged in court, and that is the United States. And companies are realizing this too. Like Klarna is trying to list on the New York Stock Exchange for a myriad of different reasons, but the primary reason it has stated is that the amount of capital in America is so abundant that they're better able to defend its valuation. So simply put, if you want money cash injected into the system, you need investors. You need these whales to bring their money onto your shores. But you need you need rules and regulations in place to help protect their interests. Otherwise, it goes against their interests. And it's very much a race to the bottom at this point, to see who could protect shareholder interests more and more. And it is costing a lot of workers their ability to keep up with inflation. So, it's a complicated issue. It's a very complicated issue. But the main point I wanted to argue is, as long as this system stays in place, there is a local minimum of where investor capital just consistently falls from both ends, from developing countries and more developed and more progressive countries, into this local minimum that is the United States. So, I hope that explains my train of thinking. If you have any questions, definitely leave it in the comments. I will try to address it if you have it. If you have any questions. That being said, if you also have suggestions for next topics, I'm all ears. Let me know what you want to hear. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.